we need to talk about the changes to Ricky's character. Now, for the sake of brevity, and the knowledge that most people will not sit through my 30+ minute take on the issue, I'm just going to do a TLDW right at top. I don't like, agree with, or support the changes made to Ricky's character. I believe Yannick Robin and their experiences with ableism at McCarter Theater, and I support their Save Ricky Potts campaign, and have signed the Change.org petition, which I have linked in the description, and I implore you to sign as well. That is the core of my message, and if that's all you take away from this video, that's fine by me. But I do have a more nuanced take about Ricky's character and representation in theater that I feel now would be a good time to talk about. And while I always want these videos to be a sort of dialogue where you give your take in the comments, I simply ask that you watch the full video before passing any judgment, because many times I've had people come into my comments and argue me on a point that I never made because they didn't watch the full video. To me, this issue is very gray, and I think talking about it in its complexity and with all of its nuance is the most interesting and important way to talk about it. Anyways, I've always had an issue with Ricky and Misha as characters. They've always felt less developed than the other three known members of the choir, Noel, Ocean, Constance. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that those two never had consistent actors with them. Whether that's a symptom or a cause of the problem, I don't know. I don't know if the changes in actors caused the characters to have a weaker sense of identity, or if the characters not being that well fleshed out caused them to recast their parts over and over trying to find their voice or something. Regardless, I think it's pretty obvious that when you watch the show, despite it being an ensemble piece, it's sort of Ocean's the main character, Noel and Constance are the supporting characters, and then Misha and Ricky are just sort of there in the background. This never took away my love for the show or for the characters, but it was always really clear watching it that the idea of who Ricky and Misha was never as clear as the other three. And I think this has helped mediated in Misha because he gets his two songs. You get to see a sort of different side of him when he sings Talia versus when he sings The Song Is Awesome. You get to see how Talia's love really changed him and how he was working to be a better person, and the sort of multiple sides to him and the struggles that he was really going through, and how losing his opportunity to be with Talia really sort of broke him. But I don't think that Ricky ever gets that opportunity. He just has his one song, and I think that it does well to establish the idea that he was more than his disability. He was imaginative and sort of a bold person, and as I've said before, I think giving him an overtly sexual song works against the stereotype and sort of this pigeonhole that a lot of disabled characters have of being very infantilized. But other than that, he's not really a person. All the other characters have this big I want song where they want to come back, they're fighting to come back, they're competing to come back, and I never got that from Ricky. He was just content living in his head, and he even dropped out of the competition, and I think that's a nice contrast overall, and it sort of helps drive home the final message of the story of be happy with the life that you have. But it makes it really hard to care about and root for him when Ricky doesn't really have any motivation in the story. To me, it doesn't make that much sense narratively, because why is he here then? I think that might be a holdover from the cabaret style show, but I never really understood what Ricky wanted or why he should come back. And I don't think that's due to a lack of trying. I think that there was a glimpse of maybe something during his duo scene with Jane where he's talking about the name Savannah, where he's it's a name I've been saving up, but everything I've been saving has to go. And I've talked about this before, but saving for what? The only explanations that I've heard other people say was maybe it was for a child, which I've already disagreed with, or maybe a name for his cats, or a character in his head, but it's literally never explained or foreshadowed or given more context to in the story at all. And Ricky and Misha have historically been getting the short end of the stick when it comes to cut lines and moments in order to make the show flow better or whatever. We all know Misha used to have so many more lines and moments that developed his character, and so did Ricky. And those two, but I think Ricky more than Misha, end up because of this, being less well-rounded characters. All this to say, I don't think calling Ricky a main character is accurate. If anybody's a main character, it's unfortunately Ocean. Does this mean that I think Ricky deserves to have his character treated this way? No, of course not. But ultimately, I think that because Ricky is so underdeveloped in comparison to the other characters, and he's so far removed from the story, that anything done to or with his character is not seen as a big deal, because he's not really impactful to the story outside of being a character in it. Ricky does not influence the story in any way. He adds to the overall message of don't judge a book by its cover, people are more than what you think they are, everybody has a world inside, blah 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 blah. But unfortunately, if Ricky was removed from the story, I don't think it would affect it much. It does now, because he is a character in the story and everybody knows him and expects his character to be there. But if somebody had seen a version of the show in which Ricky was just completely erased from the script, I don't think that they would walk away with a different interpretation of the story, or they would think it was less impactful than a version with Ricky in it. And again, I do not think that this is okay or right, nor do I think that Ricky is not an important character to people, but I think he means more in the meta narrative, if that makes sense. Like, Ricky is an important character because he is a disabled character on stage in a musical in which there are very few disabled characters in theater, period. Not because the character of Ricky is actually important to the story of Ride the Cyclone. And that's because I don't think the show was ever written with him in mind. I don't think that there was ever a thought as to who Ricky was outside of space-age bachelor man. And I think a lot of the appeal of that song is in its sort of raunchy shock value more than anything. And I still wholeheartedly love and enjoy Ricky and all of the performances I got to see with him in it. But I have to admit, a lot of my love for him comes from the idea of him that I've colored in and not from anything that the script actually gave us. But speaking of the script, let's talk about the recent changes. If you haven't heard, Ricky has now been rewritten so that he no longer has a degenerative disease that causes him to use mobility aids, and is now just mute due to trauma in his childhood. The script is available for you to read on BroadwayLicensing.com if you want to read it for yourself, but I think that this move was so fucking stupid for so many reasons. One, it solves literally no problems. I assume the reason that they changed this was to address the ableism controversy that has been surrounding the show as more people have gotten into it and have been talking about it. And I have my own thoughts on that I'll get to later, but this move literally does not make the show not ableist. Taking away Ricky's disability does not mean that the show was not, nor is not, ableist. Now you've just shown that instead of actually caring about having a disabled character on stage and in your show, you would rather write him out entirely than finding a way to like properly portray him. It's a bad look. A worse look, actually. Really fumbled the bag there. But two, it actually makes the script worse. I don't understand why Ride the Cyclone is still going through rewrites, because I was under the impression that like we were done. That's the reason that the show had moved from like having its like consistent casts, like sort of do different shows of it, do different productions of it, and they've started like licensing it out to other people. Because the show's done. It's written. It's complete. But we're still doing the rewrites. And I get it, you always like want to improve your work, but at some point you gotta be like, no, we're done. You finish it, you step away, you move on. Especially when what you're doing is giving a character a completely different backstory. That should not be happening this late in the game. And it doesn't even make sense because all they did was change Karnak's like blurb at the beginning of like Ricky's bumper to take away the fact that he's disabled. And like if we want to argue semantics, he might still technically be disabled, but you know what I mean. But then they continue on the scene and then you see him talk with Father Marcus about getting his wish. And I'm like, if he's not a sick, dying child anymore, why is he getting a Make-A-Wish? It literally makes no sense. And as shitty as it is, I get why they would want to have like a fully able-bodied actor play Ricky, because he's only like kind of disabled. In like my interpretation of him at least, like in his head, he's not disabled. Like in his head, the part of like not who he was perceived to be, who he dreamt he was, like that part of him, he is not disabled. The only people who bring up the fact that he's disabled are like other people. When Karnak is talking about him, when Ocean is talking about him, like in his own section, he doesn't bring it up at all. It's not a thing in his like sort of fantasy world. And like to visually show that on stage, you want an actor who can portray the imaginary version of him, not who he was on like the actual day-to-day. And I think that's sort of the main issue with Ricky's character, and where a lot of this controversy and people calling his portrayal and the show itself ableist is coming from. That being said though, different people have different opinions on if this show is ableist, what parts are ableist, depending on their interpretation of the show. Like I've seen people say that when Karnak describes Ricky and his family using a series of strange gestures, only they understood, that that's supposed to be like ableist euphemism for sign language. But I've also seen other people, myself included, interpret that to mean that they actually don't know any sort of official ASL sign language and that they just made up their own signs, either due to like lack of information to properly learn ASL or due to like Ricky's lack of mobility. I think that they just sort of like made up different gestures and movements to like communicate in whatever way was best for them. And because of my interpretation of the show, I do not think that that part is ableist. Now, that does not mean that I think that people who do think it's ableist are wrong, but I also don't think that that means that they're automatically right. There is no one way to think of the show, and the communities being discussed and represented here are not monoliths, so not everybody is going to agree on how these characters should be handled. Like, I understand that the idea of a disabled person wanting to be like cured of their disability is not great in the grand scheme of like representation, but let's not sit here and pretend like that experience isn't true to at least some disabled people, because once again, not a monolith. Not everybody has the same experience. I encourage you to watch the issue with good representation because it elaborates on and explains the point that I'm trying to make way better than I can. But the gist is, good representation is boring as fuck, and I hate it. I don't think that characters who are supposed to be filling some underrepresented void need to be appealing to the lowest middle America denominator just because this might be the first time that they're seeing somebody like this in a positive light. And on that same note, I don't think that a show should be heralded just because they have a diverse cast or team. Like, the show needs to be good. And small tangent, y'all know I love K-pop. This channel's like 90% K-pop now. And K-pop the musical just closed on Broadway, and everybody was talking about how it's proof that like Broadway is racist and they don't want to see Asian stories succeed and blah 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 blah. And like, yes, obviously, Broadway is an institution steeped in systematic oppression, and they actively work to keeping like cis-het white people in like positions of power, telling their stories, having them be at the forefront of everything, because that also like reflects the main demographic of people who are able to go out and afford to see Broadway shows. But y'all, that show was not good. Like, okay, caveat, I haven't actually went and seen the show, so I probably have a flawed interpretation of it. But from what I have seen, the show was not good. And I don't think a show should be watched and seen and successful just because it has a majority Asian cast and team behind it. Like, obviously, I want Asian people to succeed. I think high tides raise all ships. I would love for all of Asia to stop infighting and finally topple white supremacy. I think we can do it. But I'm not just gonna go out of my way to go see a show just because it's Asian, even when the show itself is bad. The songs alone in the show are not good. And that's like the main thing that you want your musical to be good at, is have a good song so that people go and they listen to the cast album, they buy the cast album. Not only to increase the number of people who know about the show and increase your consumer base so that people who have not heard about the show and are nowhere near New York to see the show now have an interest in the show, so that when they have the ability to go to New York or that show comes to them, that they go and see it. And it also increases your number of revenue streams, because people who can't go all the way to New York to see a Broadway show are going to buy the album, listen to the album, give you a bit more money. Y'all, and I listen to a lot of K-pop, a lot of which people think is not good. They call it pots and pans music on Twitter, okay? It's fucking brutal out there. So I'm not gonna sit here and try to make you think that like, oh, I only listen to good K-pop music, and that's why I think the show is... No! I have bad taste too! But the songs in this musical sound just like those TikToks of like making fun of those musical theater girls trying to sing a pop song where it's like really overpronounced and they like add a weird vibrato for no fucking reason. Like, the songs were not giving what they needed to give, and I think that dissuaded me, and I'm sure a lot of other people, from seeing the show, because one of the main draws of K-pop is the music. And if your musical about K-pop does not have good music, then it's not going to succeed, as we saw. And I heard that the book was trash. So I don't think that this show failed just because Broadway doesn't want to see Asian stories, but I also don't think it should have succeeded on that fact alone. Anyways, back to Ride the Cyclone. I think all of the characters should be allowed to be complex and interesting, and sometimes even bad. Like, this is one of the reasons I really hate the Misha is being catfished but not by Noel because that's homophobic argument, because a character who just so happens to be gay can still be a bad and or morally great character, because not all gay people are good people, because at the end of the day, they're still people. And I think this goes back to the idea that I talked about before, where people want to feel morally justified in all of their interests because they believe that the things that they like or enjoy or consume reflect on their values or who they are as a person, and I just don't have that idea at all. That's why I still love Ocean. And I don't feel the need to like defend my love for her or defend her in general, because there are plenty of people who have issues with her and the things that she says. They think that she's like deplorable and ableist, and like, who am I to say that they're wrong? But at the end of the day, I do not care, because I do not think that my enjoyment of a fictional character has any effect or correlation on who I am as a person or what I believe and value. But I think some people have taken the fiction affects reality idea and just sort of twisted it to mean that if any like piece of media or character isn't 100% good, then it's obviously like pushing harmful ideas and stereotypes out into the world, and it's going to like affect real world people. And I just like, I don't agree with that. Because one, people should have critical thinking skills, and if they don't, they should have an adult around them that does. And two, anyone using like a character or a show to justify real world violence is already a shitty person. And people just trying to make art should not have to be held accountable for that. While it can be, art is not required to be anybody's conduit to becoming a better person. So when people say the script changes are taking something away from us, I just don't agree, because we are not owed anything from these shows. It's like when somebody tweeted at Quinta Brunson on Twitter being like, hey, you should really have like a school shooter episode on Abbott Elementary because it would be a great opportunity to like teach people about the horrors of school shooting, or whatever the fuck they wanted to say. And she was like, no, we're not gonna do that. We don't need to do that. Like, there are plenty of shows who do that sort of after school special sort of energy, and like, just because you want that from a show does not mean that they are required to give that to you. There are plenty of other pieces of media that you can go out and enjoy that will give that to you. Like, Ride the Cyclone does not owe us good representation, or any representation at all. I think they're fully within their rights to change the characters however they see fit. But on the other hand, if that change upsets you, then you are also more than welcome to voice your frustrations by boycotting future productions, signing the change.org petition, spreading the hashtag on social media. And I encourage you to do so, as I have done as well. Now, I already hear somebody saying, but if we agree, then why are we arguing? And I mostly just wanted to share my thoughts and opinions about representation in media, and I thought that this was an appropriate time to do so. But I also just didn't want to give like a blanket statement of support without giving the details on where I stand. I can disagree with some of the ideas around this while still supporting the overall message, because at the end of the day, I support making theater more accessible. And I think what happened to Yannick Robin was super fucked up. Like, this is more than just a character. A real world person was very obviously discriminated against because the systems in power would rather have able-bodied actors in the show than respect the disabled story that they originally wrote, and in the process fucked over a very talented actor who worked very hard to make Ricky into an actual character instead of just like an idea of a person who sings a funny song. Like, if this had happened in between productions, I probably would have been like, oh, that's shitty of them. But ultimately not said anything because of all the reasons I just said before. I don't think that they owe us anything. They can make whatever changes to the script that they want. And them changing the show now does not change the version that I saw and enjoyed in 2018. And if I'm being so very honest with y'all, I don't plan on seeing Ride the Cyclone again. The only reason that I had seen it so many times was because I was in a place in my life in which I had the time and money to do so, and because of the consistent cast that went with it. Like, I have a job, I got bills now, I don't have the time or money to be like going to see whatever productions in the middle of nowhere America. And a lot of my love for the show was tied into the love that the actors who had been with the show for years had for the show. I'm not saying I'll never see it again, but I'm not planning to go out of my way to see it like I have in the past. So whatever they're doing with the show now, I don't really care. Like, I've seen the show, that's my version, it's the version I'll always remember, and if they want to go and fuck it up now, they can drive that car off the cliff. I'm not gonna be in it. But I mostly care about this now because, once again, what happened with Yannick Robin was super fucked up. And I more so care about them and their experience and honoring what they wish to do with this than anything that's actually happening within the Ride the Cyclone writing, producing bullshit. And because Yannick Robin themselves is the one who's pushing for this change, who's pushing for the Save Ricky Potts campaign, I will support it because I support them, and I support their overall mission to make theater more accessible and the work that they put in to make Ricky a better character. Anyways, if you sat through all my roundabout rambling, thank you. If you disagree, let me know why in the comments. If you did agree though, also let me know why in the comments. I feel like so often people only want to comment when they don't like what I had to say. And I'm like, damn. Okay. But if you do agree, you need to tell me specifically why, because too often people come in my comments and they're like, oh, what, you're wrong about what you said about XYZ. And I'm like, what the fuck did I say? Like, you have to give me a time code or something. Also, more Ride the Cyclone videos coming in the future. I know it's been like so long since my last video, but I've been planning some like big projects and stuff, and it's just taking a little time for it to come out. But there will be more Ride the Cyclone content despite all of the things I said about not caring about the show. Like, I want to make it clear, I don't care about what they do with the show. The version of the show that lives in my mind and in my heart is very real to me. Like Supernatural, the good version that lives in my head is the one I will continue to talk about. So look forward to those videos coming out, or if this whole fiasco has made you swear off the show forever, then like, watch my other videos, I don't know. By any sort of... Hold on, something just exploded on my table. Why you never leave candles unattended. Not gonna burn my house down.